She hadn't expected a courtroom to feel like a battlefield, but when the mistress struck her belly, the billionaire froze, and only then did he realize the judge holding her fate was her father. If you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because, tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into it. Clara sat quietly in the corner of her sunlit apartment, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. The hum of the city below seeped through the window, a distant reminder of life moving on while hers seemed suspended in a fragile bubble of betrayal and uncertainty. Her reflection in the glass was pale, eyes shadowed with sleepless nights, lips pressed tight to hide the storm of anger and fear swirling inside. She traced the outline of her stomach gently, as if assuring herself that her child, innocent, unknowing, was safe despite the chaos looming just beyond her door. The news had arrived 2 weeks ago. Alexander, her husband, the man whose wealth and charm had once made her heart race, had been seeing someone else. A woman named Vivian, bold and unrepentant, who flaunted her presence like a dagger aimed at Clara's heart. Calls, messages, whispers, they all arrived with a cruel precision, each one a reminder of trust broken and boundaries shattered. Across town, Alexander sat in the leather embrace of his private office, overlooking the glittering city skyline. Numbers scrolled endlessly across his monitor, contracts, meetings, stock reports, a symphony of success that should have felt satisfying. Yet satisfaction eluded him. Something heavier pressed against his chest, a sense of impending reckoning he had tried to ignore. He hadn't expected the stakes to feel so personal, so raw. A meeting had been scheduled, a formal proceeding, a legal confrontation that promised to spill secrets he hadn't fully reckoned with. Meanwhile, Judge Harrison entered the courthouse with quiet authority, the polished floors echoing beneath her heels. To the public, she was professional, impartial, unyielding, a pillar of justice in the city's highest courtroom. But today, every step carried a private tension. Her daughter was inside, vulnerable, facing humiliation that no one should endure. She adjusted the collar of her robe, a subtle exhale betraying the emotional burden she carried beneath the stoic exterior. The courtroom was a cavern of polished wood and muted murmurs. Reporters crowded the edges, cameras poised, pencils ready to capture every word. Vivacious whispers of scandal buzzed like electricity in the air. Clara's heartbeat accelerated as she stepped through the doors, each echoing footstep a drumbeat of anxiety. She smoothed her dress instinctively, clutching the small leather folder of documents that felt both shield and weapon. Alexander arrived moments later, immaculate as always, tailored suit precise, tie perfectly knotted, hair gleaming under the courtroom lights. He moved with the confidence of a man used to control, used to people bending around him. Yet when his gaze found Clara across the room, a flicker of something unfamiliar, a twinge of guilt, of recognition, crossed his face. He looked away quickly, unwilling to acknowledge the weight of his actions fully, but the tension between them pulsed like a live wire. Vivian entered last, a flash of color and confidence, heels clicking against the marble floor with deliberate precision. She carried herself with the arrogance of someone untouchable, a predator in a room of prey. Her eyes found Clara immediately, a smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. The air thickened, each breath drawn a challenge, a silent provocation. Clara's father, Judge Harrison, took his seat at the bench, his expression unyielding, eyes hidden behind glasses that reflected the polished courtroom lights. His heart pounded quietly, each beat a silent warning. Protect, guide, observe. Today, justice and family were about to collide in a storm far more personal than anyone in the room could imagine. As the bailiff called the court to order, Clara's knees threatened to buckle under the weight of expectation, humiliation, and fear. Alexander's jaw tightened, a flicker of doubt betraying his polished exterior. Vivian's smirk hardened into a predator's grin. And Judge Harrison, calm yet alert, surveyed the room with eyes that had seen law and life in equal measure, silently preparing for the moment when private and public truths would crash together. In the charged silence that followed, Clara took a shaky breath, placing her hands lightly on her belly, a shield of love and hope. The court had begun, But the real battle, the collision of betrayal, power, and family, was about to erupt. Every heartbeat in the room seemed amplified, every whisper a prelude to the storm. The courtroom was thick with anticipation, every eye fixed on the trio at the center of the unfolding drama. Clara sat upright, her hands folded protectively over her belly, trying to summon the calm she didn't feel. The hum of whispered speculation from the gallery was a low, buzzing undertone to the pounding of her own heartbeat. Vivian leaned forward in her seat, eyes glinting with mischief and defiance. The smirk that had once seemed harmless now radiated danger, a predator aware of its advantage. Alexander's expression was unreadable, polished and composed, but the tension in his jaw betrayed an awareness of the consequences he had long avoided. "Your Honor," the bailiff announced, "we will proceed." Judge Harrison's voice cut through the murmur, calm yet firm, commanding silence that settled over the room like a velvet cloak. Clara's father's presence alone should have been comforting, but the weight of the situation pressed down on her chest. Every muscle coiled, every nerve alert. The exchange started with formalities, pleadings, statements, the dance of legal precision, but it was electric with unspoken fury. Then, in a single, shocking moment, Vivian rose. Her chair scraped sharply against the polished floor. Her hand shot out before anyone could intervene. A crack rang through the room, not a sound of paper or argument, but the sharp impact of betrayal made physical. Clara gasped, hand instinctively rising to her cheek, then to her belly. Pain flared in shock, humiliation, and fear all at once. The gallery erupted with gasps and murmurs. Cameras whirred, flashes igniting like lightning. Vivian's smirk widened. "Maybe now you'll learn your place," she spat, her voice dripping with malice. Alexander froze, his mind scrambling. Wealth, power, and influence had never prepared him for the raw spectacle of betrayal laid bare. He could move, he could intervene, but for a heartbeat he felt paralyzed. His wife, his unborn child, hurt at the hands of someone who flaunted their audacity in public. The luxury and control he commanded elsewhere meant nothing here. Judge Harrison's gavel struck sharply, a thunderclap of authority. "Enough!" His voice carried both legal weight and personal wrath, resonating in the space between justice and family loyalty. Vivian paused, momentarily stunned by the thunder in the room. Her confidence flickered, though she masked it quickly with forced composure. Clara sank slightly in her seat, trembling, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. The room spun around her, the weight of public scrutiny, the betrayal she had never expected, the exposure of private pain in front of strangers. She drew a shaky breath, her gaze flicking to her father's, silently pleading for protection, for control in a situation that felt chaotic and uncontrollable. Alexander leaned forward, voice taut with anger and disbelief. "Vivian, how dare you?" But his words faltered. The legal reality, the potential consequences, and the public nature of the confrontation all tangled with his panic. He could act, but the stakes were enormous. One wrong move, and the scandal would only worsen. Judge Harrison's eyes, hard yet warm, swept over them all. This courtroom will not tolerate assault, nor will it ignore deception and harm. His gaze landed on Alexander, then Vivian, then Clara, a sequence that bridged law and personal truth. In that instant, the hidden bond between father and daughter charged the room with tension. Vivian's defiance wavered, her lips pressing into a thin line. For the first time, she seemed aware that the game she had played, the thrill of public humiliation, was about to collide with consequences far beyond her control. Clara exhaled shakily, feeling the tremor of adrenaline fade, replaced by a fragile surge of clarity. Her father was present, aware, and ready. The shock of the slap had sparked something deeper, a revelation that justice, protection, and truth might still prevail despite humiliation and fear. Alexander's hands clenched on the table, knuckles white. He had been blindsided, but the layers of ego and power he relied on could no longer shield him from the human consequences of his actions. The billionaire suddenly felt small, accountable, and raw in a way that money and influence could not fix. The gallery remained tense, cameras flashing, whispers swirling. But inside the courtroom, a quiet shift began. The balance of power was no longer just in wealth, but in integrity, law, and family loyalty. Clara's trembling hands rested lightly on her belly, a symbol of resilience and vulnerability intertwined. Vivian finally sat back, uncertainty flickering across her features. She had provoked a storm she could not control, and for the first time, she realized the consequences would be personal as well as public. Judge Harrison's gavel struck again, deliberate and final. "We proceed under the law. Any further outbursts will be addressed immediately." His voice carried the authority of justice and the protection of his daughter. The collision had occurred, now the reckoning would follow. Clara exhaled slowly, chest rising and falling, the adrenaline fading into resolve. Her father was there. Alexander was confronted with the gravity of his actions. And Vivian, once untouchable, was now exposed to a world she had underestimated. The storm had been unleashed. The courtroom had quieted, but the storm inside Clara raged unchecked. Her fingers trembled against the edge of the table, still tingling from the shock of Vivian's slap. The flush of humiliation burned across her cheeks, and every whisper in the gallery felt like a blade slicing through her composure. She drew a shaky breath, wishing desperately to disappear, to retreat from the eyes, the cameras, the judgment surrounding her. Her father's stern gaze met hers for a brief moment. It offered reassurance, but it also reminded her of the impossible duality she faced: daughter and plaintiff, vulnerable yet expected to remain composed. Clara's pride and fear clashed violently. She wanted to flee, to retreat into the safety of anonymity, yet some stubborn spark refused to yield. Alexander sat rigidly in his seat, jaw tight, knuckles pale as his fingers gripped the armrest. The weight of the moment pressed on him, not the public scrutiny, not the legal exposure, but the undeniable truth of his failure. For the first time, his wealth and influence meant nothing. The consequences of his choices were immediate and visceral. He wanted to reach for Clara, to shield her from humiliation, but uncertainty and fear of making things worse kept his hands at his sides. Pride whispered that he should stay distant, that control must be maintained at all costs, yet a deeper part of him urged vulnerability and honesty. Vivian, sensing the shifting energy, leaned back in her chair, her expression carefully neutral. The thrill of dominance she had felt in the slap now gave way to subtle unease. She had assumed the upper hand, but the quiet authority radiating from Judge Harrison, combined with Clara's growing resolve, unsettled her. She realized that power, no matter how flaunted, could be challenged, and that control was not guaranteed in a courtroom or a family. Minutes passed in tense silence. The bailiff shuffled papers, the gallery murmured quietly, but no one moved to speak. Every character wrestled with their private turmoil. Clara's hands rested lightly on her belly, a shield and anchor simultaneously. She replayed the incident in her mind, the sting of humiliation and the surge of fear, and wondered if she could endure what was yet to come. Alexander's mind raced. He saw the depth of Vivian's provocation, but also recognized the impact of his absence, his obliviousness that allowed this confrontation to escalate. Guilt surged, mingling with fear and desire to protect. Yet every instinct to step forward collided with caution, the fear of worsening the scandal or being publicly chastised. He remained seated, silent, wrestling with pride and conscience. Clara, sensing his hesitation, felt a surge of frustration. How can he do nothing? She thought. But she understood too, the gap between her expectations and his reality was wider than she had imagined. The emotional chasm between what she wanted, protection, acknowledgement, justice, and what he could offer in the moment created a tension that left her trembling, both from fear and anger. Vivian finally spoke, her voice calm but laced with subtle venom. "I told you, Clara. You can't compete. You never could." Every word was a calculated jab, designed to wound, to assert dominance. The gallery shifted, cameras capturing the exchange, the world watching as humiliation and conflict unfolded in real time. Clara swallowed, forcing herself to maintain composure. She wanted to respond, to strike back with words that would expose Vivian's arrogance, but her pride and fear warred. She resisted, biting back, relying on the silent authority of her father to navigate the moment. Judge Harrison's gavel hit the desk lightly, commanding attention without a word. The room stilled instantly. Every flicker of defiance, every tremor of fear, was acknowledged. The balance between personal and professional authority shifted subtly. His presence reminded them all that law, morality, and family loyalty were intertwined in this conflict. The resistance continued internally. Clara's heartbeat thrummed, a tension she could neither release nor escape. Alexander sat rigidly, observing, wishing he could undo his oversight, wishing he had acted sooner. Vivian, outwardly calm, felt the first cracks in her armor. Each character's private struggle, shame, guilt, fear, pride, stretched the room taut with anticipation. As the session drew on, Clara realized the first step toward reclaiming her dignity would not come from confrontation alone. It required patience, endurance, and trust in the justice her father embodied. Alexander's presence, hesitant yet attentive, reminded her that accountability and protection might emerge, not immediately, but eventually. Vivian's arrogance, no matter how performative, could be dismantled in time through persistence, truth, and courage. The act closed on a tense, unresolved note, the characters suspended between private turmoil and public scrutiny, each wrestling with choices yet to be made. Clara's hands rested lightly on her belly, her father's gaze unwavering, Alexander's pride bruised but reflective, Vivian's confidence subtly shaken. The courtroom had become a crucible, testing loyalty, courage, and the power of restraint. The courtroom had settled into a fragile rhythm, but the tension remained thick, almost tangible. Clara sat upright, hands lightly cradling her belly, every nerve alert. Alexander remained rigid, his eyes fixed intermittently on her, the gravity of the situation weighing on him. Vivian's confident posture had softened slightly, the aftershock of her earlier outburst still rippling beneath her composed exterior. Procedural necessity forced them into proximity. The judge called for a recess, but all parties were required to remain for consultation on interim measures, including custody arrangements and protective orders. Clara, though anxious, recognized that this was an opportunity to regain control, to navigate the storm not with rash emotion, but with strategy and courage. Alexander approached her side cautiously. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low, careful. It carried more than concern. It held acknowledgement of guilt, of responsibility, and an unspoken promise of support. Clara met his gaze briefly, hesitation warring with relief. She wanted comfort, yet she was wary. Trust had been fractured, vulnerability felt dangerous. "I'm managing," she said carefully, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "But we need to be deliberate. Strategic." He nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his features. "Agreed. I'll follow your lead." The judge called them back, and the formalities resumed. Now, the enforced proximity compelled interaction, and Clara found herself forced into exchanges she would have otherwise avoided. Every glance, every subtle shift in posture, revealed more about their intentions and feelings than words ever could. Vivian, sensing the balance of authority and the father-daughter dynamic, attempted subtle provocations, interjections designed to unsettle Clara, but these were tempered by the judge's watchful eye. Each comment was met with measured responses, demonstrating that while confrontation was inevitable, control and poise could reclaim emotional power. Alexander found himself observing Clara in new ways, the resilience behind her careful gestures, the quiet determination that belied her initial shock. He realized that his role was not merely as a participant, but as a partner in navigating the consequences he had set in motion. Each step, each careful word, became part of an unspoken negotiation, a bridge toward reconciliation that required patience and empathy. The forced interactions extended beyond the courtroom. During breaks, discussions about property, support, and legal strategy demanded joint input. They had to converse, negotiate, and present a united front despite the underlying turbulence. Clara, initially resistant, found that Alexander's willingness to listen and defer subtly to her insights created moments of alignment, however brief. In a quiet corridor, away from the gallery's prying eyes, Clara finally spoke with vulnerability. I've spent so long protecting myself, building walls. I'm not sure I can trust anyone, not fully. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the weight of both fear and hope. Alexander took a tentative step closer. I know, and I understand, but I can't change the past. What I can do is stand here with you, listen and work with you, every step of the way. The honesty in his tone, paired with the enforced closeness, forced an emotional reckoning. Clara felt her defenses weaken, not entirely, but enough to acknowledge that shared vulnerability could be a path forward. Even Vivian, in her own way, was affected by the dynamic. The judge's subtle interventions and Clara's growing composure exposed cracks in her bravado. The mistress realized that the game of provocation had limits and that power without consequence was fragile. By the end of the day, the enforced proximity had achieved something no confrontation could: clarity. Clara understood that control, dignity, and emotional strength could coexist with vulnerability. Alexander recognized that accountability required humility and genuine presence. And even Vivian began to see that her dominance in public spaces could not withstand the combined weight of integrity, family loyalty, and truth. As the courtroom cleared for the evening, Clara and Alexander walked together briefly toward the exit. Their steps were measured, tentative, yet there was a subtle alignment, an unspoken acknowledgement that they were beginning to navigate the storm as a unit. The forced connection had revealed more than strategy. It had illuminated courage, potential reconciliation, and the fragile beginnings of trust rebuilt under scrutiny. The courtroom seemed smaller, heavier, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the tension of weeks. Clara sat upright, fingers lightly resting on her belly, the air thick with anticipation. Every glance from Vivian, every murmur from the gallery, felt amplified. The prior exchanges had been tense, controlled, but now, the fragile balance teetered on the edge of collapse. Vivian's smirk had vanished, replaced by a calculated tension. She had played her role with confidence, but the subtle authority of Judge Harrison, coupled with Clara's growing composure, began to unravel her performance. Her voice, once sharp with provocation, now carried a hesitant undertone. Every word she spoke seemed weighed, measured, but not entirely convincing. Alexander remained rigid, posture stiff, jaw tight. The events of the past days had forced reflection he could not avoid. Wealth, power, influence, they were meaningless here, eclipsed by raw human consequence. He had tried to remain composed, but guilt and fear simmered just below the surface. He understood, perhaps too late, the depth of betrayal and the weight of his absence. Then came the revelation that shattered any remaining equilibrium. Judge Harrison leaned forward, voice steady but infused with unmistakable authority. Before we proceed, there is a matter that must be acknowledged. The connection between this court and the parties involved. His gaze swept the room, landing firmly on Alexander, then Clara. I am her father. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Cameras whirred, flashes igniting like lightning. Alexander's eyes widened, disbelief washing over him. Clara's hand instinctively rose to her chest, heart hammering in her throat. Vivian's confidence faltered completely, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty she had not felt before. Clara felt a surge of relief and vulnerability collide. Her father's presence had always been a quiet anchor, but now it was unmistakable, undeniable, and infused with personal authority. She drew a shaky breath, leaning slightly toward him, trusting in the protection his identity promised. Alexander's mind raced, a torrent of realization flooding through him. Every act of negligence, every misstep that had allowed Vivian's audacity to escalate, now carried immediate weight. The billionaire, accustomed to controlling outcomes, found himself powerless in the face of law, family, and truth intertwined. Vivian, sensing the shift, tried to maintain composure. This changes nothing, she said, voice tight, eyes darting. Yet the subtle crack in her facade betrayed her awareness that her previous advantage had evaporated. Clara rose slowly, drawing herself upright with quiet dignity. It changes everything, she said softly, voice firm, though trembling. Truth matters. Justice matters. And this, she gestured toward Vivian, toward the courtroom, This stops now. Alexander finally spoke, voice low, laced with guilt and clarity. Clara, I failed to protect you. To act. I let pride blind me. I let ambition blind me. But I see now, I see everything. His words hung in the air, raw, unguarded, and heavy with accountability. The gallery shifted, the hum of whispered speculation replaced by a tense, expectant silence. Judge Harrison's gaze remained unwavering, commanding respect without shouting, guiding the proceedings with a balance of personal care and professional authority. Vivian, realizing the magnitude of the moment, faltered completely. Her previous confidence evaporated as she faced not only the law but the weight of moral consequence. The slaps, the provocations, the attempts to dominate, they were all meaningless against the combined force of family, justice, and truth. Clara's hands rested lightly on her belly. Every nerve trembled, every emotion intensified. The storm of humiliation, fear, and betrayal had reached its apex, but in that crucible, clarity emerged. Her father's presence ensured safety, Alexander's acknowledgement signaled accountability, and Vivian's exposure laid bare the limits of arrogance. A long silence followed, each character suspended in the aftermath of revelation. Clara exhaled slowly, letting tension drain, but not entirely. She had faced the worst, the slap, the betrayal, the public exposure, and survived. Alexander's shoulders, once rigid, softened slightly as he absorbed the gravity of his failures and the path forward. Vivian, subdued, recognized the shift in power, the inevitability of consequence. Judge Harrison finally spoke, voice firm yet gentle. We will proceed with clarity. Justice will be served, but let us remember the human element, vulnerability, dignity, and accountability. Clara's eyes met her father's briefly, a silent acknowledgement of trust and love. Alexander's gaze found hers, a mix of remorse and determination. Vivian remained, tense and subdued, understanding that control had slipped through her fingers and that the consequences were irreversible. The room, once electric with conflict, now hummed with the weight of truth. Clara's heart, though still racing, felt steadier. The breaking point had arrived, and with it came clarity, courage, and the undeniable presence of justice aligned with family, integrity, and human emotion. The courtroom had emptied, leaving only the residual tension hanging in the air like smoke. Clara sat at the edge of the bench, fingers brushing lightly over her belly, still absorbing the aftershocks of the revelation. Her father's presence had shifted everything, his authority a shield, his love a subtle reassurance. Yet beneath the protection lay a choice she alone had to make: surrender to anger and humiliation or reclaim her power with clarity and resolve. Alexander lingered nearby, hands resting on the polished wood, posture taut with apprehension. The weight of failure and responsibility pressed heavily upon him. He had witnessed the full impact of Vivian's audacity, the consequences of his inaction, and the gravity of the family dynamic he had overlooked. Pride, that familiar armor, felt heavy and meaningless. For the first time, he understood that accountability was not optional, it was unavoidable. Vivian had been escorted out, her earlier bravado replaced by an uneasy silence that echoed through the now empty room. She had no recourse, no control over the truth now illuminated, and her absence created a space that was both tense and revealing. Clara's gaze met Alexander's. No words were needed yet. The silence carried the weight of everything unsaid: betrayal, remorse, longing, and the potential for reconciliation. She drew in a slow breath, steadying herself, acknowledging the rawness of her emotions while refusing to let them dictate her actions. "I can't pretend this hasn't hurt," she said finally, voice quiet but unwavering. "You weren't just blind, you allowed it. I nearly lost my sense of safety, of trust, because of it." Alexander nodded slowly, eyes steady, voice low. "I know. I can't undo what happened. I can't erase the humiliation or the fear. But I can do everything in my power to make this right. For you, for our child, for us. I'll take responsibility, every day, in every way I can." Her lips pressed together, contemplating. The court had exposed far more than the legal arguments. It had laid bare trust, loyalty, and the consequences of human failing. Clara could let anger and betrayal dictate her path, retreating into bitterness and fear. Or she could make a deliberate choice, rooted in courage, dignity, and hope for the future. "I don't want revenge," she said finally. "I want honesty. I want protection, for my child, for myself. And I want to know that you'll be present, accountable, and sincere." "I will," Alexander said immediately. His voice carried no hesitation, no self-serving ambition, only raw determination. "I'll prove it in every action, every decision, every day from this moment forward." The judge, observing silently, gave a subtle nod of acknowledgement. The father-daughter bond had informed the proceedings, but Clara's choices now dictated the course forward. Her courage in facing humiliation, her willingness to engage with Alexander in truth, and her insistence on dignity set the tone for resolution. Clara exhaled, the tight coil of tension in her chest loosening slightly. She had made her choice. Not out of weakness, not from fear, not from obligation, but from clarity, courage, and recognition of what mattered most: safety, integrity, and family. Alexander stepped closer, careful to respect her space, yet firm in presence. "I won't fail you again," he said softly. "I see the pain I caused, and I promise I will act differently. Not because I must, but because I want to, because you and our child deserve it." Clara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but there was no fear, only determination. "Then we move forward," she said. "Together, but on terms that respect dignity and truth." The empty courtroom seemed almost to exhale with them, the residual tension transforming into quiet resolve. Alexander extended his hand, and this time, Clara accepted, not as a gesture of reconciliation alone, but as a commitment to navigate accountability, trust, and emotional connection together. Even outside the courtroom, the choice reverberated. Clara walked with measured steps, confidence tempered by awareness, holding the subtle triumph of agency and clarity. Alexander followed, posture slightly more relaxed, carrying the weight of responsibility without faltering. They were aligned not just physically, but emotionally, ready to face what remained with courage, honesty, and purpose. The day had forced confrontation, exposed raw truths, and revealed vulnerabilities. The choice now rested on courage, to forgive, to take responsibility, to rebuild, and to honor the bonds that mattered. Clara and Alexander had seized it. Their decision was deliberate, considered, and transformative, an anchor in a storm of betrayal and uncertainty. The courtroom was quiet now, stripped of spectators and flashbulbs, leaving only a sense of calm that felt almost foreign after days of tension. Clara rested her hand lightly on her belly, feeling the gentle stir of life within, a reminder that hope and resilience could flourish even amidst chaos. The storm of betrayal, humiliation, and fear had passed, leaving space for clarity, strength, and careful rebuilding. Alexander remained by her side, posture less rigid than before, his gaze soft yet steady. The weight of previous failures hung lightly behind him, replaced by a palpable determination to honor the trust Clara had granted. There was no grand display, no dramatic apology, just a quiet, steady presence that spoke louder than words ever could. Judge Harrison observed the proceedings with professional composure, though his eyes softened at his daughter's calm demeanor. The fatherly bond, previously veiled by authority and propriety, had guided every decision and every subtle intervention. Justice had been upheld, but so had dignity, integrity, and family loyalty. Vivian had been removed from the courtroom under formal charges of contempt and assault. Her confidence had crumbled entirely, leaving her to face the consequences of actions that had once seemed inconsequential in the glittering world of power and influence. For the first time, she understood that provocation and dominance could not withstand the combined force of truth, accountability, and personal courage. Clara exhaled, a long, measured breath that seemed to carry the weight of the past weeks out of her body. She felt lighter, steadier, and more in control than she had in months. Her father approached, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You handled yourself with strength," he said quietly. "I couldn't be prouder." Her lips curved in a faint smile, eyes glistening. Thank you, Dad. For everything, for protecting me, guiding me, and for believing in me even when I doubted myself. Alexander stepped closer, careful to respect the moment, yet certain in his intent. Clara, I know I have much to earn. But I will spend every day proving that I can be someone you and our child can rely on. That I can be present, accountable, and worthy of the trust you've shown me. Her gaze softened, and a tentative warmth spread through her chest. She had faced public humiliation, betrayal, and fear, but she had also witnessed honesty, accountability, and protective love. The choice she had made in Act 6, the deliberate step toward reconciliation rooted in dignity, now bore fruit. Then let's move forward, she said finally. Together, but with clear boundaries and respect. Alexander nodded, squeezing her hand lightly, a promise forged not in grand gestures but in steady commitment. The power dynamic had shifted. Wealth and influence were no longer the defining forces in the room. Trust, courage, and emotional integrity had taken precedence. Outside the courtroom, the city lights gleamed against the evening sky, reflecting in puddles left from a soft drizzle. Clara and Alexander walked together, their steps aligned, unhurried, carrying the quiet triumph of emotional honesty. The air smelled faintly of rain and asphalt, grounding the moment in reality, yet the significance of their reconciliation lingered like a warm glow. Clara looked down at her belly, fingers brushing softly across the curve. This little one, she murmured, deserves a world where courage and honesty matter more than deception and fear. Alexander smiled, his arm resting lightly around her shoulders. And I intend to build that world with you. No shortcuts. No excuses. Only presence, honesty, and commitment. The memory of Vivian's slap, the humiliation, and the courtroom tension remained, but it no longer dictated their emotions. Each step they took, each glance they exchanged, was a reaffirmation that dignity, accountability, and love could survive even the most public betrayals. Clara laughed softly, a sound that mingled relief, joy, and quiet empowerment. I never imagined a courtroom could feel like both a battlefield and a sanctuary, she said, glancing at Alexander. He chuckled gently. It's strange how the same place can hold danger and protection, humiliation and redemption. But we endured it. And now we have clarity. They paused at a small balcony overlooking the city. The wind tugged lightly at her hair, mingling with the hum of distant traffic and the soft glow of streetlights. Alexander brushed a stray strand from her face, his touch tender, grounding, and deliberate. No matter what comes next, he said, we face it together. Every step. Clara rested her head against his shoulder, allowing herself to feel the culmination of fear, resilience, and trust. Together, she echoed, voice soft but unwavering. The city below shimmered like 1,000 tiny sparks, and in that moment, the past felt distant. Courtroom battles, betrayal, humiliation, they were no longer the center of their story. What mattered now was choice, courage, and love reaffirmed. Judge Harrison's presence had ensured justice, but it was Clara's bravery and Alexander's accountability that had restored emotional balance. Vivian's defeat had been inevitable, but it was the quiet, deliberate decisions of the central characters that transformed chaos into resolution. They lingered on the balcony, silent except for the subtle rhythm of their synchronized breaths. The world could wait. Here, together, they had reclaimed what truly mattered: safety, dignity, and the promise of a future forged from honesty and mutual respect. Have you ever seen justice and personal courage align to create a turning point in someone's life? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes truth and bravery can transform everything. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.